There's a moment that comes after the day has thinned out, when the messages stop, when no one is asking anything of you anymore. Some people notice it then, not as a thought, more like a feeling that finally has room to surface. A tiredness that doesn't quite match what the day demanded. A tightness that lingers even though nothing is happening now. The sense of having been on for hours without remembering when it started. You might replay small interactions, nothing dramatic, a conversation where you agreed a little faster than you felt, a pause where you softened your voice without thinking, a moment where you felt the urge to keep things smooth, even though part of you had already gone quiet. Some people are very good at reading a room, noticing shifts in tone, at adjusting themselves before anyone else has to ask. It often doesn't feel like effort while it's happening. It feels like being responsible, attentive, considerate. Only later does the body register it. A dull ache between the shoulders, jaw tension that won't release. A strange emotional flatness, like something inside stepped back for a while and hasn't fully returned yet. There can be a subtle confusion too, about what you actually wanted, about whether you felt disappointed or relieved, about why being alone feels quieter, but also strangely empty. Some people describe it as fading slightly at the edges, not disappearing entirely, just becoming less vivid in their own awareness. And if you try to name what's wrong, nothing obvious presents itself. No clear mistakes, no moment you can point to and say, that's where it happened. Just a familiarity, a sense that this isn't new, that you felt this before, many times in many ordinary situations. You might even tell yourself it's nothing, that this is just how you are, that this is what it means to be good with people. And yet, when the day finally goes quiet, there's often a faint impression that something was set aside again. Not dramatically, not painfully, just quietly. If you recognize yourself in any of this, it's easy for a quiet judgment to follow. A sense that maybe this means something is wrong with you, that you're too sensitive, too accommodating, too willing to disappear. But this isn't a weakness. And it isn't necessary. It isn't manipulation either, even if you sometimes worry that it looks that way from the outside. What's happening here isn't a moral failure. It's not a flaw in your character. It's not evidence that you don't value yourself enough. For some people, staying aware of others became a way of staying oriented, a way of keeping things stable, of making sure nothing tipped too far, too fast. That kind of awareness doesn't come from emptiness. It comes from attention, from learning how to read what's subtle and unspoken, from adjusting before friction has a chance to form. There is a kind of quiet intelligence in that, not the kind that gets named or praised openly, but the kind that learns through experience what keeps things steady. This way of moving through interactions often feels automatic because, at some point, it worked. It reduced tension, it kept conversations flowing, it helped you stay connected. And even now, it can still feel like the responsible thing to do, like the kind thing, like the thing that keeps people comfortable. None of this means you're doing something wrong. It simply means your system learned to prioritize attunement over expression. That understanding isn't meant to excuse the cost, but it does change the tone of the question you're asking yourself. Not what's wrong with me, but something quieter. There is a name that sometimes gets used for this experience, not because it explains everything and not because it needs to define you, but because having language can make something feel less vague. The word is self-abandonment. It doesn't describe a personality, and it isn't a diagnosis. It's simply a way of pointing to what happens when someone repeatedly steps away from their own inner signals in order to keep connection intact. This is not the same thing as being selfless. Selflessness still leaves a self present. There is a choice in it. There is a sense of offering something you have rather than leaving something behind. Self-abandonment feels different. It's quieter. It happens in moments that barely register. It looks like not mentioning the discomfort, like smoothing over a reaction before it fully forms, like agreeing, not because you want to, but because it feels safer than introducing tension. Often, it isn't a conscious decision at all. It's a subtle turning away, not from others, but from yourself. What makes the term useful is not its precision, but its honesty. It names the cost without assigning blame. It acknowledges that something internal is being set aside again and again in service of staying connected. And for many people, simply hearing it can bring a small sense of relief. Not because it offers an answer, but because it offers recognition. This has been happening. There is a word for it, and it doesn't mean you are fixed this way or that this is who you are. It only means that at some point, this became the way things were managed. Patterns like this don't appear out of nowhere. They form quietly in response to what is allowed, rewarded, or tolerated in relationships. For some people, connection came with conditions, not spoken outright but felt. Affection was warmer when things were calm. Attention lasted longer when there was no disruption. Being emotionally easy made interactions smoother, lighter, more predictable. In those kinds of environments, awareness becomes important. You learn to notice when the mood shifts, when a pause means something, when a certain tone invites closeness and another creates distance. There doesn't have to be overt harm for this to happen. Sometimes unpredictability is enough. Sometimes it's inconsistency. Sometimes it's the subtle sense that certain feelings create friction, while others are easier for everyone to hold. Over time, something is learned. That staying agreeable keeps things steady, that managing your reactions helps maintain closeness, that not adding weight to the room makes you easier to stay with. Often this adaptation is noticed and reinforced. You're described as mature, understanding, low maintenance, the one who doesn't make things difficult. Those words land as praise, and they carry meaning. This is how you stay connected. So attention shifts outward. You become skilled at adjusting, at anticipating what will land well, at smoothing moments before they escalate. None of this requires conscious planning. It's simply the system doing what systems do, responding to patterns and preserving what matters. Avoiding conflict in this context isn't about fear. It's about continuity, about keeping the relationship intact by staying within the emotional range that feels safe for everyone involved. And from the inside, it often feels reasonable, even responsible. Why introduce tension when you can absorb it? Why speak so? A thing that might create distance when silence keeps things close. Seen this way, the pattern isn't a flaw. It's an intelligent response to relational constraints, a way of staying connected when expression felt risky, a way of belonging that asked for attunement more than presence. And the part of you that learned this wasn't careless or weak. It was paying attention. Even when you understand where this pattern came from, it often keeps happening, not because you're ignoring the insight, and not because you're unwilling to change. It's because this doesn't live at the level of thought. For many people, the body learned early how to stay oriented in relationships, before words, before reflection, before choice. There's a quiet, ongoing scan that happens in the background, a checking of tone, a sensitivity to pauses, a noticing of micro-shifts that most people never register. This isn't conscious monitoring, it's felt as tension or alertness, as a readiness to adjust. When something feels slightly off, a change in mood, a hint of disappointment, the body responds immediately, not with panic, but with movement, softening, explaining, agreeing, smoothing the moment before it has time to become uncomfortable. And when the tension settles, there's often a brief sense of relief, a subtle release in the chest, a sense that things are okay again. That relief matters. It teaches the system that compliance restores safety. This is why insight alone rarely stops the pattern. The body isn't responding to ideas, it's responding to perceived threat. Not threat in the dramatic sense, but the threat of disconnection, of distance, of emotional rupture. Managing the emotional climate becomes a way of regulating that threat. Keeping things calm keeps the body calm. So when you find yourself doing this automatically, it isn't overthinking, it's threat regulation. A learned response that once helped you stay connected, a reflex shaped by repetition, not intention. Seen this way, the difficulty isn't a lack of willpower, it's that your system is doing exactly what it learned to do, move towards safety as it understands it, and understanding that can change the tone of the struggle. Over time, this way of relating asks for something in return, not all at once, and not in ways that are easy to point to. The cost is usually quiet. There's often a steady kind of tiredness that settles in, not the exhaustion that comes from doing too much, but the fatigue that comes from staying slightly alert all the time, from keeping parts of yourself on hold, from monitoring and adjusting again and again. Desire can become harder to hear, not because it's gone, but because it's been postponed so often. When you're used to checking what others need first, your own wants can start to feel vague, unformed, easier to ignore than to clarify. There may be moments of irritation that don't seem to have a clear cause, a shortness that surprises you, a quiet resentment that has nowhere to land because no one explicitly asked you to give anything up. Nothing was demanded. and yet something was. For some people, there's also a sense of unreality that comes and goes, as if you're present but not fully inhabiting yourself, as if you move through interactions competently but from a slight distance. It's not dramatic emptiness, more like a thinning. Parts of you learn to wait, your preferences, your reactions, your impulses to speak or move or disagree. They didn't disappear. They just stopped arriving on time. And because this waiting happens quietly, it's easy to miss, easy to assume the tiredness is just life, that the flatness is just maturity, that the irritation means you're ungrateful or difficult. Grief, when it appears here, is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself as sadness. It feels more like a low ache, a recognition that something has been deferred for a long time without ceremony. Not ruined, not destroyed, just held back. And naming that doesn't require blame or urgency. It simply asks for honesty about what this way of being has quietly required of you. Even when the cost becomes clear, the idea of doing this differently can feel unsettling, not freeing, not relieving, dangerous. For many people, the first thing that appears is guilt, a heavy, immediate sense that pulling back would hurt someone, that it would be unkind, that it would change how you're seen. This guilt often gets mistaken for conscience, as if it's a signal that something immoral is about to happen. But in experiences like this, guilt is often an attachment alarm, a signal that closeness feels at risk, that the familiar way of staying connected is being disrupted. There can also be a fear of becoming selfish, of taking up too much space, of no longer being the easy one, the reliable one, the person others can lean on without hesitation. When usefulness has been central for a long time, it can start to feel like identity, not something you do, but something you are. For some people, being needed became proof they were allowed to exist. So the idea of being less accommodating doesn't just raise practical questions, it raises existential ones. Who are you if you're not smoothing things over? What happens if you stop anticipating and start pausing? What replaces the quiet reassurance that comes from being indispensable? There is also a specific kind of grief here, not only for what was postponed, but for what might no longer be required of you. Being needed can feel grounding. It gives shape. It provides a place in the emotional landscape of others. Letting go of that role can feel like stepping into uncertainty, like giving up a position that, while costly, also offered a sense of belonging. Seen this way, resistance isn't stubbornness, and it isn't fear of growth. It's a response to the possibility of losing something that once made connection feel secure. There is another way this can be held, not as a plan, not as something to fix, more as a question that hasn't needed to be asked yet. What if presence didn't require disappearance? For some people, this idea feels unfamiliar at first, almost abstract, because being present has long meant staying attuned outward, not inward. But occasionally, there are small moments when something else becomes possible, a pause that lasts a second longer than usual, a feeling that rises before it's smoothed away, a quiet noticing of what's happening inside without needing to do anything about it. These moments don't announce themselves as change. They don't come with certainty or confidence. They're often so subtle they can be missed entirely, and that's enough. The shift here isn't about asserting or refusing. It's about allowing internal signals to exist alongside connection rather than beneath it. There's a difference between disappearing to keep closeness and staying present while closeness finds its own shape. The second doesn't arrive all at once. It appears tentatively, in brief impressions. For some people, just realizing that this is even conceivable is significant, not because it demands anything now, but because it loosens the assumption that there is only one way to belong. Nothing needs to be decided here. Nothing needs to be practiced or proven. It's simply an opening, a suggestion that the self doesn't have to be postponed in order for connection to continue, and that idea can remain unfinished for as long as it needs to. If there's anything to carry from this, it isn't a conclusion, and it isn't a demand to be different. It's a recognition that the way you learned to relate was not careless or naive. It required attention, sensitivity, a willingness to notice what others felt before it was spoken. That matters. You didn't abandon yourself because you lacked something. You did it because connection mattered, and this was the way it stayed intact. There is dignity in that, even if the cost was real. even if parts of you learn to wait longer than they should have. Understanding this doesn't resolve everything, it doesn't undo habits or answer what comes next. But it does change the tone of the story you tell about yourself. Not as someone who failed to speak up, but as someone who learned, very early, how to remain connected. And perhaps that's enough for now, to let that be seen clearly, to hold it without judgment. Nothing needs to be decided in this moment. Nothing needs to be repaired or reclaimed. Just the quiet knowledge that there was meaning in the way you adapted, and that meaning is allowed to exist even as the story remains unfinished.